Last year, I will never look at clowns the same way again. My town is small, nothing ever really happens here. But every fall, the traveling carnival rolls in, setting up in the empty field near the woods. It's the biggest event of the season. Everyone goes, kids, parents, teenagers, looking for something to do. I never cared much for it. But my little brother, Evan, begged me to take him. My parents were working late, so I agreed. I wish I had said no. We got there around 8. The air smelled like fried food and cheap candy. The flashing lights made everything feel surreal, like stepping into another world. Evan ran ahead, excited to hit the rides. I followed, keeping an eye on him, making sure he didn't get lost. As he ran past the game booths, I noticed something off. The workers all seemed normal, except the clowns. There were too many of them, more than I had ever seen at a carnival. They weren't the fun kind either. Their costumes were faded, dirty, their face paint cracked like it had been on too long, their grins stretched too wide, their eyes hollow. One of them stood by the entrance to the funhouse, watching me, his head tilted just slightly, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Evan grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the House of Mirrors. I didn't want to go, but he begged, so I gave in. The entrance was dark, the lights flickering. As we stepped inside, the air was stale, thick with dust. The moment we walked in, I felt trapped. The mirrors twisted our reflections, making our bodies stretch and shrink in unnatural ways. Evan ran ahead, laughing, but then the laughter shifted deeper, almost distorted. I called his name, but he didn't answer. I turned a corner and stopped. There was a clown standing in the reflection, staring at me. I spun around, but there was no one there, just an empty hallway. I turned back to the mirror, and the clown was gone. But now Evan was in the reflection. He was standing still too, still staring at me, his eyes blank. I ran down the hall, calling his name, panic rising, and finally I found him. He was just standing there, smiling. When I grabbed his arm, he whispered, "Did you see him?" I didn't ask what he meant. I just pulled him out of there. As we stepped back into the night air, I felt a weight lift. But then, I saw them standing near the exit for clowns, lined up perfectly still, watching us, their painted grins never changing. I told Evan it was time to go, he whined, but followed as we walked toward the parking lot. I kept looking back. They were following us, not running, not even walking quickly, just moving slowly, deliberately, keeping the same distance between us. When we got home, Evan was quiet. He went straight to bed, without a fight, which was unusual, but I was too shaken to question it. I locked every door in the house, checked the windows twice. But as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't really left the carnival behind. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a sound, soft tapping at my window. My stomach dropped. I turned my head slowly. The curtains were open, and for a split second, I saw something, a face, white paint, black, hollow eyes, red lips, stretched too wide. Then it was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, Evan was acting strange. He wouldn't talk, just sat on the couch, staring at the wall. I asked what was wrong, but he just mumbled, "He's still here." That was enough. I called my best friend Mark, told him everything. He laughed at first, but when he saw how serious I was, he agreed to come over that night. We sat in the living room, waiting. Evan had gone to bed early, refusing to say another word. Around 2 a.m., we heard it, footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving through the hallway. Mark grabbed a bat, I grabbed a knife. We crept toward Evan's room. The door was slightly open. I pushed it and froze. Evan was standing in the middle of the room, his back to us, whispering softly to himself. But it wasn't just him. There was something in the corner, a shadow, hunched, long fingers twitching, its head tilting back and forth. The moment I stepped inside, the whispering stopped. Evan turned to face me, his eyes blank. Then he smiled. But it wasn't his smile. It was too wide, too unnatural. Mark yanked Me back slamming the door shut, Evan started laughing. But it wasn't his laugh, it was deep, distorted, like the laughter in the funhouse. We ran out of the house, jumped in my car, and drove. We didn't stop until we were miles away, parked in an empty lot, trying to catch our breath. We sat in silence until Mark finally spoke. "Dude, what the hell was that?" I didn't have an answer. I called my parents, told them something was wrong. They rushed home, found Evan asleep like nothing had happened. He didn't remember anything, at least that's what he said. But I knew better. We moved. A week later, my parents thought it was for a fresh start. But I knew it was because of what happened. Evan got better, slowly. But sometimes at night, I hear him talking in his sleep, laughing too, and I wonder if we ever really left that carnival behind. This took place when I was 15 years old. I grew up in a small, quiet town in Pennsylvania, the kind of place where nothing ever happens. At least that's what I thought, until that night I had a friend named Eric. We did everything together, and that included sneaking out at night to do stupid things, like explore abandoned places, or dare each other to walk through the woods alone. There was an old fairground on the outskirts of town. It hadn't been used in years, but every fall this traveling carnival would set up there for a few weeks before moving on to the next place. The carnival had everything: rides, games, food stands, and of course clowns, lots of them. I always hated clowns. Something about them felt fake, like they were hiding something sinister beneath their painted faces. Eric knew this and thought it would be hilarious to dare me to go into the funhouse alone. He promised me $20 if I could make it all the way. Through by myself, I wasn't about to let him call me a coward. So I took the dare. The funhouse was one of those old, rickety structures with warped mirrors, spinning tunnels and floors that moved when you stepped on them. The lights inside were dim, flickering in some places, and the air smelled like dust and something sour. I walked through cautiously, my own reflection stretching and twisting in the mirrors around me. The place was empty. No other kids, no workers. Just me and my distorted reflection. Then I saw him at first. I thought he was one of those animatronic clowns set up to scare people. He stood in the corner, just barely out of the light. His costume was filthy, the colors faded and stained. His painted face was cracked, like the makeup had been on for days, maybe weeks. I tried to ignore him and kept walking. But then he moved. It was subtle, just a slight tilt of his head. But I knew he was real. I told myself he was just an actor, playing a role, but something felt wrong. He wasn't smiling, not really. His painted grin was frozen in place. But his eyes, they were empty, cold, like he was looking straight through me. I forced myself to keep walking, pushing through the spinning tunnel and over the tilting floor. The whole time I could hear the faint sound of footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, like someone was following me. I sped up, telling myself it was part of the attraction. But then I made it to the last room, a long dark hallway leading to the exit. At the end of the hall stood another clown. This one was different, taller, lankier. His costume was even dirtier, and his hands were too big, like he was wearing gloves stuffed with something to make them look swollen. I stopped, my heart pounding. He just stood there, not moving, not speaking. I took a step forward, and the light above him flickered for a split second. I thought I saw something else, his face beneath. The makeup, the skin underneath looked bruised, raw, like the paint was covering something up. I didn't want to walk past him, but I had no choice. The exit was right behind him. I took a deep breath and walked forward. As I passed him, he leaned in, so close I could feel his breath on my neck, and in the softest whisper he said, "Don't come back." I bolted out of there as fast as I could. Eric was waiting outside laughing. Until he saw my face, he asked what happened, but I just shook my head and told him we needed to leave. The whole walk home, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us that night. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, not the mask, not the paint, but what was underneath the next day. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that I had let my fear get the best of me. But then Eric called. He sounded freaked out, said he got a weird text message from an unknown number. It was a picture of the two of us, standing outside the funhouse the night before, taken from inside the tent. I told him it was probably just a prank, but deep down, I knew better that night. I woke up to a sound outside my window, a soft tapping. I didn't want to look, but something in me had to. I pulled back the curtain, and there he was standing in my yard in full costume, his head tilted, just like before, his oversized hands hanging limp at his sides. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I stumbled backward, and when I looked again, he was gone. The next morning, I told my parents everything. They thought I was imagining things. Maybe I was stressed from school, or maybe it was just some carnival worker messing around. But I knew I wasn't crazy. The carnival left town a few days later, and for a while I thought that was the end of it, until the nightmares started. Every night I dreamed of that fun house, of walking through it alone. But in my dreams, the mirrors didn't reflect me, they reflected him, standing behind me, getting closer every time. Then one night, I woke up to a sound inside my room. It was so soft, almost like breathing. I didn't move, just lay there listening. I reached for my phone, but before I could grab it, I heard something that made my blood run cold, a whisper right next to my ear. "You shouldn't have come back." I shot up, turned on my light, but my room was empty. The door was still locked, the window shut tight. But on my closet door, there was something new, a single red handprint smeared across the wood. I moved out of that house as soon as I could, but no matter where I go, I still feel like I'm being watched. Sometimes when I pass by a mirror, I swear I see him standing just behind me, waiting. I've never liked clowns, never found them funny, never understood why anyone would, but what happened last year turned my mild discomfort into full-blown fear. I live in a quiet town, not much happens here, but every fall, the traveling carnival comes through, setting up in the old fairgrounds on the edge of town. It's always been a big deal. Kids love it, parents tolerate it, and teenagers mostly go to screw around and take selfies. I was never a fan, but my best friend, Ryan, convinced me to go. He said we had to make memories before we graduated, so I went. I wish I hadn't. The carnival was like any other, bright flashing lights, spinning rides, and the thick smell of fried food and cheap candy. The workers all had that same look, tired eyes, forced smiles, just going through the motions. But then there were the clowns, too many of them. They weren't like the goofy circus kind either. They moved too slowly. Their costumes were old, tattered, like they'd been wearing them for years. The face paint was smudged, cracked, like it had been there too long. Their grins were wide, too wide, and their eyes never seemed to match. I was already creeped out, but Ryan was having a blast, dragging me to the funhouse, said it was tradition. I didn't want to go, but he was already shoving tickets at the bored teenager running the entrance the moment I stepped inside. I knew something was wrong. The air was thick, stale, with the scent of dust and something sour. The lights flickered, casting strange, twisting shadows. The mirrors were warped, making us look stretched, distorted. I felt dizzy as we moved through the winding corridors. But what made my stomach churn was the laughter, soft at first, just a faint giggle echoing through the halls. We turned a corner, and Ryan bumped into a figure standing perfectly still. It was a clown, not moving, just standing there, blocking the path. His costume was worse, up close, faded, stained with something dark. His painted-on smile was cracked, but his eyes, those eyes were dead, hollow, like a doll's. Ryan laughed nervously, muttered something about the workers being committed to their roles. He tried to step around the clown, but the clown moved to shifting just enough to keep him from passing. I grabbed Ryan's arm, whispering that we should go back, but then the lights flickered again, and suddenly the clown was gone, just gone, like he had never been there. Ryan laughed, said we were scaring ourselves. But I wasn't laughing, I wanted out now. We rushed through the rest of the maze, and when we finally stumbled out into the cool night air, I felt like I could breathe again. But then I saw him standing near one of the food stands, watching us. He wasn't alone. 2 more clowns stood nearby, still unmoving, their heads tilted just slightly, as if they were listening to something we couldn't hear. I pulled Ryan away, telling him we needed to leave, but as we walked toward the exit, I kept looking back. They were following, not moving quickly, not trying to hide, just walking slowly, deliberately, always keeping the same distance from us. I was nearly running by the time we reached my car. Ryan was still laughing, saying I was being dramatic, but when he turned to look back, his face went pale. They were standing just outside the parking lot, lined up perfectly, still staring as we sped away. I tried to shake it, have told myself they were just workers playing a prank, but deep down, I knew better. That night, I woke up to a sound outside my window, a soft tapping. I tried to ignore it, but then my phone buzzed. I reached for it, heart pounding. Unknown number, 1 new message. I hesitated before opening it, but when I did, my stomach dropped. It was a picture of my house taken from the street. My bedroom window was in frame. Lights off, curtains open. I snapped my head toward the window, but saw nothing outside. I shut the curtains, locked them, and spent the rest of the night staring at my bedroom door. The next morning, I told myself it was just a joke. Maybe Ryan had given my number to someone, maybe it was just a coincidence. But when I checked my phone again, there was another message, another picture, this time taken from closer in my driveway. Whoever took it had been just feet away from my house. I didn't respond, just deleted the messages and tried to move on, but things didn't stop that night. I heard footsteps outside, slow, heavy footsteps pacing back and forth beneath my window. I forced myself to stay still, clutching my blanket like a shield. The next day, I found something in the yard. A red rubber clown nose sitting perfectly in the middle of the grass. I told Ryan, and he tried to laugh it off. Said maybe someone from the carnival had followed us. But even he looked nervous. Decided to let it go. But that night, I woke up to a new sound, whispering, low, breathy. Right outside my bedroom door, my body locked up, my mind screamed at me to move, but I couldn't. Then, the doorknob started to turn. I shot out of bed, grabbing the bat I kept under my bed, and rushed the door, but when I yanked it open, the hallway was empty, just silence, stretching out before me. But I wasn't alone, I could feel it, something watching, waiting. The next morning, I found another clown nose, this time right outside my door. I called the police, but there was nothing they could do. They told me to lock my doors, be careful. But I knew they didn't believe me. I wouldn't have believed me either. The messages continued, more pictures. Closer each time, one of my backyard, one from my porch, then one from inside my house, taken from the hallway leading to my bedroom. I moved out that same day, packed a bag, and drove to my cousin's place. 2 towns over, but the nightmares followed every night. I dream of that fun house of mirrors stretching into infinity, of figures moving just out of sight. The laughter, the whispers, they never stop. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up to my phone buzzing, and I already know what I'll see. Another message, another picture, but I won't look. I can't, because I know one day, the picture won't be of my house, it'll be of me, asleep in my bed.